this pandemic. So thank you to everybody who has joined in. If I could just take just a few minutes at the beginning to introduce those of us who are here in Boston at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and then very quickly just do a quick round of folks who are attending and joining us from around the world. My name is Bhaskar Chakravorti. I'm the Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School. And I will ask my colleagues, Alnoor Ebrahim, Dorothy Orsolak, and Agnes Hatley, to say just a few words about themselves, what makes them jump out of bed every morning. And then we'll very quickly go around the room to make sure we know who everybody is and where they're situated. So perhaps I will start with you, Alnoor.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's good to have you with us on this call. My name is Alnoor Ebrahim. I'm on the faculty at the Fletcher School. And what gets me up every morning is the chance to be part of a school where every single person is working on a problem affecting global society, right? This is in the DNA of the entire institution. And you've got people working on very localized challenges to global challenges, environment, poverty, healthcare, pandemics, migration, human rights, you name it. There's somebody working on this issue. And what we do is we bring an interdisciplinary perspective to bear on these challenges. So my own work, my own teaching is on the challenges of impact measurement and accountability in social change organizations. Those can be NGOs, they can be businesses. I do a lot of work with social enterprises and impact investors, and have a new book out on the subject. It's called Measuring Social Change. And this is just what I love to do, and Fletcher is the perfect place for me to do that. Just as a bit of background, I taught at Harvard Business School for 8 years before coming here, and at a state institution, Virginia Tech, for 8 years before that, and got my PhD at Stanford. And for me, Fletcher has been the best fit of all of these institutions because of this ability to work on social problems with a managerial lens, and then have colleagues that are working on related issues. So it's good to be with you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alnoor. Great to have you here. Dorothy?
Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to spend time with you this morning. What gets me up in the morning to join all of you and to join Fletcher is the incredible community. I came to Fletcher over 20 years ago when I first hired Fletcher students at a consulting firm, and I first encountered the incredible interdisciplinary nature, the global problem-solving skills that Fletcher graduates were bringing to the world. And so when I joined, I immediately wanted to be part of this community, to bring this global problem-solving mindset to more students and to more communities and to more businesses and private sector employers. My role at Fletcher is to connect what is happening in the classroom with what Professor Alnoor teaches and other faculty, and bring it to the world at large, primarily the private sector. And so as my role as Director of Corporate Outreach and Corporate Relations, I'm interacting with employers, whether they're consulting firms, financial institutions, multinational corporations, and other organizations that have these problems, and matching them with the kind of problem solvers that Fletcher trains and inculcates here. I also want to make a call out to Professor D.P. Singh, who is lurking in the shadows here. Professor D.P. Singh teaches our global consulting course, and so I've had the pleasure of working with him on bringing in consulting course clients of all kinds for our students to work on these problems in a 3-month class where you learn the skill sets and the mindsets of the consulting process. I also run a speaker series and an entrepreneurship venture competition, among many other things. So it's my pleasure to join you and to welcome you to this program and to Fletcher.
Great, thank you, Dorothy. Agnes?
Hello, everyone. My name is Agnes Hetley. I'm Assistant Director of the MIB program, the Master of International Business program here at Fletcher. And what gets me out of bed every morning is our MIB students. I work with our MIBs throughout their 2 years at Fletcher and provide academic advising along with being available as a resource. I manage the mentorship program, one of those things, as well as an experiential learning fund that's available for all Fletcher students. So yeah, that's my role here at Fletcher.
Great, thank you, Agnes. Deepi. You need to unmute yourself. Can we unmute him? There you go.
There we go. Agnes has these special settings, I think, that she's the master of ceremonies over here and controls everything. Good job. So hi guys, I'm DP Singh, and what gets me out of bed is my cup of ginger tea, and of course beyond that is the opportunity to work with the people that you just heard from. But most importantly, it's working with students like yourselves and the passion you guys bring to the world. I teach, as Dorothy mentioned, a business consulting class. It's really a sort of a problem-solving, skill-building class done through both lectures and a live project. And again, the mix of issues that a place like Fletcher brings to this is unlike anything else. They range from deep social issues to traditional business issues. It's really a unique blend of both the types of issues that we get asked to look at and the type of perspectives that students like yourselves bring to these issues.
Great, thank you, DP. So just by way of a quick background on myself, I'm the Dean of Global Business at Fletcher, and I also direct the Institute for Business in the Global Context. Short form is IBGC, and now once the phone call is over, the Zoom call is over, try repeating that to see if you can get the sequence of letters right. Most of our students still don't, so we force them to actually say the whole name of the Institute. Business and global context, and that is what the Institute is about, and that is what business at Fletcher is about, working at the intersection of business and the larger context within which business decisions are made. And those business decisions have a profound impact on that larger context, and all the issues, the complexities, the nuances of that larger context have a profound influence on business decisions. Now, the reason why we are so passionate about what we do at Fletcher and why this institute and business at Fletcher exists is because that intersection is a very difficult and, shall we say, a lonely place to be if you're in higher education. Because I feel that higher education has done a disservice to people such as yourself. In fact, it's done a disservice to leaders everywhere. And you guys are the leaders that will take us out into the future once we get out of the tunnel that we're in right now. And the reason why I say it's done a disservice is that higher education has corralled the reality that we all know surrounds us into individual silos. We stick business into business schools, we stick government and policy into policy schools, we stick law into law schools, we stick technology into engineering schools, and we know the reality is a combination of all of that. The issues that we are thinking about right now, the medium over which we are having this conversation right now, is a combination of all those elements. So higher education is forcing us to kind of step away from that intersectional reality. And what we hope through a collective of everybody you've seen on the screen here and many others at Fletcher and all your peers at the Fletcher School is to not feel so lonely at the intersection, to be able to understand the complexities of business and global context in a seamless, integrative whole, to be able to be agile, to cross those boundaries, not just global geographic boundaries, but also the boundaries of disciplines, and really break that orthodoxy of higher education. So that's you can see why I'm so passionate about what we're doing. You can see why each one of us around the screen is so passionate about what we're doing, and we learn not just from the person at the front of the classroom. Each one of our students learns from the person sitting to the left of them and the person sitting to the right of them and the person behind them, because collectively we bring that global understanding. Our students come from all over the world. They come from experiences from all over the world. And that is truly, I would say, absolutely unique relative to every other institution that any of us have been in. By way of a quick background, I came to Fletcher in 2011, and prior to that, I had wore a couple of different hats. I was at a consulting firm at McKinsey, based out of the Boston office, and I was also at Harvard Business School. I joined HBS at the same time as Alnoor, and he has aged much more gracefully than I have. Must be something about the era at Harvard, which probably contributes to the aging process or the lack thereof. In my consulting life, I started out life as an academic at the far end of mathematical economics, and I thought that was what I loved. I thought that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I accidentally went to what used to be the research labs for the Bell phone companies, and there started working on a number of different issues that accidentally had something to do with the real world. I had no interest in the real world prior to that, and suddenly I discovered this connection between ideas in academia and the use that it can be put to in making better decisions. And that sort of scratched the itch of perhaps trying out this thing called consulting. I thought I would do it for a year and go back to academia. I did it for 19 years before coming back to academia. And what I learned from those many years in two different consulting firms, the Monitor Group and McKinsey, was that the real world operates at intersections. And if you do not have that intersectional mindset, you are dead. You are going to be, if not dead, you're going to be locked into a technocratic silo, and you will find it impossible to be able to connect the dots in order to make wise long-term decisions. And what we are looking at right now in terms of the larger environment within which we live is that the inability to be able to connect the dots. And let me just kind of reflect back on the situation that we're in right now. This is, of course, an unfolding situation for everybody here in Boston and everybody around the screen. And the situation is a little bit different where each one of us is. However, we know that no matter how this unfolds, this is a tunnel that we are going to get out of. I have given up crystal ball gazing a long time back, but one thing I know is that the viruses of this kind have a lifespan, and also science has a lifespan. Science has a way of catching up. So I do believe that this tunnel will have an end, and it might be a longer tunnel than we might hope for. It might be a tunnel that we might bump into things along the way, but there's going to be light at the other end. And when we come out into that bright daylight, what is the world that we dream of on the other side? That is going to be central to the narrative of the classrooms as we kind of go ahead, because each one of us is going to own that world. And the analogy that I would want to kind of bring to you that I find very powerful, and I think it's something that I hope will be powerful in my discussions in my classrooms, is that after the cholera epidemic that sort of was devastating all across Europe, Paris was rebuilt in the 19th century by Napoleon III. And a big part of the rebuilding process was, what did we learn during the cholera epidemic? And they built Paris with wide open boulevards to let in the sunlight, because of the belief that sunlight was the ultimate disinfectant. They built Paris with modern sewage systems, which it didn't have before. So it's not just the beautiful boulevards that we are inspired by, but the stuff that we never even see, but it's fundamental to the future. Now, a lot of those boulevards and sewage systems of today are missing. We're discovering that in the United States. We're discovering that in India. We're discovering that in South Africa. We're discovering that in Brazil. How do we change that across the world? What are the barriers that stand in the way? What's the role of business? How does business interact with governments? Right as we speak today, there are businesses that are scrambling to put together jerry-rigged ventilators. Now, this is something that is an unusual role for businesses to play, to actually participate in a rapid emergency response. But it is inevitable. If you think about the larger problems of social and sustainable development, even before the pandemic, there was an enormous role for business to participate in and actually lead and drive us into the future. Because think about sustainability and development. There's probably no agent more resourceful, more innovative, more creative, and potentially more motivated than business to play a role there. Now, business was moving relatively slowly in that direction. We believe that post this pandemic, we're going to see a much greater role for businesses to play, largely because governments have put an enormous amount of resources into just managing and responding and playing from behind. So unfortunately, this was not the event that we would have used to actually signal why business at Fletcher is so very important, why learning leadership in a place like this is so very important. But we have to recognize the situation that we're all in, and recognize the situation as an opportunity for leadership on the other side of the tunnel. So sorry for the long ramble. I think we are going to get into a few more specifics. I would like to come back and start a discussion with Alnoor about his work, and specifically what are some of the issues that he engages his students on in the classroom, in his research, and also in his advisory capacity. I'd like to ask him and Dorothy and DP and Agnes about how some of that work then translates into both the practical aspects of learning at Fletcher and the practice that develops beyond Fletcher, which is what are the career opportunities. I'm sure this is something uppermost in everyone's minds. Where would I go beyond Fletcher, even while I'm considering entering Fletcher? Super important. So looks like my screen is frozen. Hopefully my voice is coming through. So if I could just ask people from just around the screen to very quickly say where you are. We can see your name, just tell us where you are so that we can situate everybody around the globe. So I can see Sally. Sally, you can lead us off. You're muted. We need.
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't mute myself. I'm in Colombia.
Colombia, wonderful. Which part of Colombia are you?
In Barranquilla right now, but I work in Bogota originally.
Okay, wonderful. I hope everything is safe where you are. Ian?
Hi, I'm in Somerville.
Could you repeat that, please?
Somerville.
Somerville, okay. I hope everything is good in Somerville, in our neighborhood. Garima?
Yeah, hi, I'm from Delhi, India.
Okay, I hope things are all right under the lockdown in Delhi.
We are hoping to get better.
Okay, yeah, so are we. Matthew? We need to unmute.
Hello,
yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am joining in from Madrid.
Okay. Well, I know that Madrid is going through a particularly difficult time, and our thoughts are with you. So stay safe.
Yes, sure.
I hope everybody around you is safe as well.
We're trying to be safe.
Thank you. Yeah. Hajime?
Hi. Good morning from Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Okay. I hope things are all right over there.
We're trying to support, trying to make a difference. Yeah.
All right. Stay well, my friend. Trevor?
Good morning from Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Okay. Well, so far Philadelphia is not right in the eye of the storm, but hopefully everything is okay where you are. Anna, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hello from Moscow, Russia.
Okay, and how are things in Moscow?
Well, actually, things are getting worse, but rather strict quarantine measures are already introduced here, so I hope it will help.
Okay, all right. It's very difficult to get accurate news out of Moscow, so hopefully you're doing all right. Shubha?
Good morning. I'm from Jaipur, India.
Okay, hope you're doing well under the lockdown.
Yeah. The lockdown's there.
All right, Vishal?
Hi, good morning. This is Vishal from Mumbai, India.
Okay, Vishal, hope everything's okay where you are. Katie?
Yeah.
Katie?
Hi there, I'm from Chicago.
Chicago, okay. All right, well, hope you're doing all right in Chicago, Katie.
Thank you so much.
All right, Ankita?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I don't think I'm able to turn my camera on, but I am based in Cambridge.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Ankita?
Sure, I said hello. I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so I'm a local.
Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've heard of that place. I hope everything is okay in Cambridge.
So far, so good.
Okay.
Hi, I'm in Washington, D.C., and everything is under a stay-at-home order at the moment.
Okay. Well, stay safe and stay home, Kevin.
Thank you.
Natasha? Natasha, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to Natasha. Siméon? We can't hear Siméon either. Eda?
Hi, from Berlin.
Eda, you in Berlin? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I hope everything is all right where you are, and our thoughts are with everybody here around the screen. Why don't, in the interest of time, I would like to go back to a discussion about business at Fletcher under normal. Go to Alnoor. Alnoor, can you say a little bit about the work that you're doing, research, teaching, advising?
Sure. Okay. So let me give you a couple of, let me get as concrete as possible to actually give you a sense of what some of my students are doing in the classroom as well as sort of beyond, to just give you a flavor for the kind of business-related work that comes out of Fletcher. Okay, sorry about that. This seemed to automatically mute and unmute, so forgive me. So one of the courses that I teach it now in the spring, is called Managing NGOs and Social Enterprises. So it's about the management and leadership of social change organizations. And these can be nonprofits, these can be for-profits. And my approach is to say, well, what's the social problem that you want to address? And then let's work backwards as to whether a nonprofit or a for-profit or even a public sector model might be the most appropriate for addressing that challenge. And so students work in teams on a project, sometimes on a startup that they themselves have launched, and sometimes for an existing client organization. So let me mention sort of 3 projects here, 2 from last year, 1 from the current year. And I've picked ones that were incubated in classes, but then have gone on to actually launch something real and competed in our venture competitions. So we've got a venture competition prize that's hosted at Fletcher called the D Prize, which just went this week, and Dorothy will say more about that. And then there's a Tufts venture competition. And these are sort of have gone on or are going on to compete in these. So last year, there were 2 students in my class who created teams in class to work on these projects and then actually went on to compete and won actually at the Tufts level. So one is a enterprise called the Now Exchange. started by Farah Momin, who's graduating this year. And it's an enterprise that works with garment factory workers in Bangladesh on reproductive health issues. And so Farah has connections in Bangladesh through family history, and had access to a couple of factories, and actually launched a series of workshops on reproductive health for the women garment workers in the factories. And that whole process has been about identifying what are the key needs, iterating on the model, pivoting on the model, and then figuring out how to actually take it to scale. A second example, Luis Villegas from Colombia. He came in a one-year MA program, had background in the public sector in Colombia, had family relationships in agriculture, and was wondering what could he do around the agriculture sector that would support smallholder farmers. So in class, he created a team. The team worked with him to develop a model. They settled on avocado farming in Colombia as being potentially high growth in the global market. So they actually looked at the global markets. They knew there was a lot of opportunity, but the social benefit was around smallholder farmers, providing support, bringing smallholder farmers together in cooperatives, accessing markets. And there's a sustainability piece to this as well, which is really creating organic, well-maintained, sustainable agriculture. This thing is going like gangbusters. And so, you know, they recently sort of planted, I think, about 40,000 avocado seeds, and are beginning to sort of build out their markets. So I think this is going to be a really sustainable and scalable business that Luis has launched. Third, we just heard actually this week, yesterday, that Dorothy organized, two current students who, Nitin Malik and Mohit Saini, have created resonance labs, which is looking at solar energy in Jharkhand province in India, really portable solar panels targeting a particular segment of the market, which is huge. It's not the bottom, the sort of the very poorest, but just above that, which is a huge unserved market where there's huge potential for both solar energy as well as solar products that can be connected to that. What all of these three projects and the many, many more that are ongoing currently at Fletcher have in common is a social purpose married to a business model. And then some connection to how does this fit in within the current economic and public sector context within which they're operating. So it requires an ability to think at the policy level, as well as at the actual managerial and execution level of the organization, whether it's launched as a for-profit business or as a nonprofit. So Fletcher students are constantly making this connection between the policy and the organizational execution level. They're also constantly making this connection across the sectors, business, government, and civil society. And this seems to be a common theme that emerges in many of our classes. Now, I oversee, as a faculty member, one of our concentrations, one of our fields of study, which is sort of business for social impact. So anyone that comes to Fletcher, you can think of sort of your studies as a T. There's sort of the broad wide band of the T, and then there's a vertical or two. The broad wide band is the interdisciplinary nature of your education. And so whether you enroll in the MIB program, the Master of International Business, or the more traditional Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, or whether you come in as a one-year MA, you're going to have sort of this broad set of offerings, which will be, you know, everything from corporate finance to human rights law to migration studies to gender and development. You have just an incredible menu to pick from. And so this broadens your horizons, your interdisciplinary expertise, your ability to speak across different disciplines and ways of thinking. But we wouldn't want to just generate generalists. We want you to pick a specialty area that you're going to devote developing your expertise in, that you can actually hang your hat on. And so we've got a whole range of these, and one of them is business for social impact, where you really focus on building the business skills in this arena. Or you can pick strategy and consulting, right? Which Bhaskar oversees, DP Singh is heavily involved in. And so you pick these verticals where you develop real expertise. As you write your master's project, your capstone project, you pick an advisor to work with where you actually focus on that vertical to develop your expertise in. So when you graduate, you're able to say, I've got this interdisciplinary knowledge, but I'm an expert in this domain, and here's my capstone to demonstrate that. And we find that that turns out to be very attractive for employers because they know they're hiring somebody that can work across diverse teams in different domains, is able to think about global problems, cross-sector problems, but also brings a particular expertise that goes beyond just your standard MBA business skills. And that turns out to be very attractive for a whole range of employers. And so I support the business for social impact field of study. And as you can tell from my own work, which is on the measurement of social change, I particularly work closely with students interested in those sets of issues.
Thank you, Alnoor. And I also know that you spend a lot of time advising students on opportunities beyond Fletcher, particularly in the area of impact. And are there a couple of conversations or students from the last couple of years that jump out at you as examples to share about, places they went after your class or after discussions with you?
Yes, absolutely. So, so for example, I just had as a guest in class a couple of weeks ago, a former student who graduated 2 years ago, Emily Gannam, who now works at Acumen, which is a boutique impact investor, one of the pioneers in the field. And so they support businesses, social enterprises in Africa, Latin America, South Asia, that are working in base of pyramid markets, producing goods and services that have a social impact. Emily, when she was here in her first year, ended up sort of taking a whole range of business-focused classes. And then very enterprising on her own, she arranged to spend the summer at BRAC, the big NGO in Bangladesh, the world's largest NGO, and was doing research on sort of some of the verticals in BRAC. She was looking at things that were initially launched as nonprofit, sort of the nonprofit part of BRAC, but then were hived off as for-profit businesses. So these could be in sort of crafts industries, it could be in sort of the healthcare market. And she was trying to understand what were the conditions that made these particular verticals within BRAC suitable for a for-profit model? And what were the conditions that actually kept other verticals on the nonprofit model? And so very sort of squarely on understanding when is a for-profit model appropriate and when is it not? And so she wrote her capstone on this. And when she was on the job market, because I knew the high quality of her work, and I knew it would be a good fit with what Acumen was looking at, I connected the two. She applied for a position there, landed a job, and she now works in their corporate partnerships and corporate strategy unit. So she came to class to talk about that work a couple of weeks ago. But very sort of self-driven, and was able to take advantage of the broad offerings at Fletcher, but then also develop this vertical. Another example of a student that has gone into the impact investing world, Caroline, I am forgetting her last name at this moment. She works at Calvert Impact, which was one of the pioneers in developing sort of a retail offering for you and I, people like you and I could actually purchase retail notes, invest in local communities, local businesses that had a social impact within the US. And Carolyn came not really from a business background, but built her business skills through the Master of International Business program, built those connections over time, landed the interview herself, had a series of offerings, and then she did her capstone project with me where she was looking at new ways of financing international development work using business models. And had this offer from Calvert. I suggested that she take it because it would get her feet wet directly on the investing side. And then over time, she'll be able to sort of step back from that and say, you know, what are the bigger picture societal level challenges that impact investing can contribute to? So those are just two examples of the kinds of work that our students are doing. But it's this combination of really self-driven, looking at the big picture, but then really being deliberate about developing a vertical or two during their time at Fletcher, and then seeking out the faculty support to build it.
So thank you, Alnoor. I think there's some terrific examples, and of course, there's so many others that I'm sure you can share. And when we think about the T, you know, whether it's Emily Gannam or Caroline Orr, and Caroline was a terrific student who was a TA in one of my classes as well. You know, it's a perfect match of somebody who wants to walk out with that T, and then they connect with the vertical of the T, say someone like yourself, who has this deep expertise in the questions and issues and relationships in the relevant space in the area of business and social impact. DP, do you want to say? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So after DP, I have a question for you that I'd like to pose.
Sure, okay. DP, do you want to say a little bit about how we bring together the practical aspects of what we are learning and essentially combine these concepts and ideas in classrooms by practicing them in response to a client problem, and how that might translate into career opportunities for the students who are part of the class?
Sure. Thanks, Bhaskar. So just staying with the social impact theme, in the consulting class, we of course learn what I'd call broadly problem-solving skills. That my background is more from the business world and the consulting world, and indeed the problem-solving skills we learn there and that I teach in the class can be applied to a range of problems. They're not necessarily skills that you use only in business issues. And indeed, the teams that we have at the moment in the class right now, two of them are working on very important social impact spaces. One on helping a client drive change towards building a circular economy in the apparel industry, and another looking at living wage issues in another industry. And the key, of course, the class is taught really as a practicum. We do some skill building in a lecture setting, but it's primarily about working with clients, learning how to frame a problem, learning how to break it down into component parts that you can then do research on, bring together ideas, and then turn them into practical recommendations that the client can then take forward and implement themselves. So not all our projects are like that. Some are more conventional business problems. But the key, though, is that the problem-solving skills we learn can be applied in essentially any type of problem that anybody might face in their career. And indeed, people that I'm teaching this class for the first time, but this class has been taught for Dorothy about 18 or 19 years, I think. And students from this class have gone on to all kinds of places. Many of the impact investing companies that are becoming more and more prevalent, impact consulting companies, and traditional consulting companies. So people can take these skills and pivot into conventional business careers. They can take these skills and deepen their ability to have an impact in sort of the more impact related worlds. And that, I think, is the magic of Fletcher, that the students that come here and the opportunities they get to go forward on have a range of flavors that you don't see everywhere.
Yeah, so thank you, DP. And I know that I was speaking with, can people hear me? Looks like my video is frozen. Okay, great. I was speaking with one of the students in your class who's actually working on one of the consulting projects that have to do with basically the client is one of the largest digital payments companies in the world. and the student is going to be working for them after this consulting assignment. So it's a really exciting opportunity for the student to continue that relationship that they have built during the class, and the skills and awareness of the company issues as they take on a role in the company. In the student's case, who's the first year, is going to be doing a summer internship there. And DP, you come from a combination of consulting and working in industries that actually build stuff, make real things. You know, you worked in Duracell. I mean, that doesn't get more real than that. And of course, in the tire industry and so many other kind of traditional industries, and you were a startup founder as well. So a wealth of expertise to draw upon. So Alnoor, back to you.
Okay, so a couple of things. So first of all, for those of you on the call, if you've got questions, do please post them on the chat feature. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a button for chat. It'll open up a window, and then just post your questions there so that we can make sure that we have time to get to those. In the meantime, the question that I want to pose to Bhaskar is, I wonder if you might say something about your digital planet work. You know, so part of what I think makes Fletcher really quite distinct is the fact that we've got sort of this combination of international affairs, international politics work, kind of the bread and butter issues that have historically been part of Fletcher, merging with global business issues. And I think your digital planet work really captures that. Would you say a bit about it and how you're engaging students in it?
Sure, thank you, Alnoor. So the Digital Planet is a research initiative that I started back in 2011. And it started with a simple question, which is that all things that are information goods are rapidly going digital. So if you went to a video store and pulled out a video from the shelf and brought it back home, watched it, then paid late fees, got annoyed at Blockbuster or whoever the video store was, that world is gone. Now, we get that same video now on streaming today. Similarly, other kinds of digital products, information-based products went from physical to digital. However, the one thing that seemed to stick around in a very sticky way was cash. Why is it that 85% of the world's payments are all made in cash, despite the fact that money is basically just an information product, just like a video that I rent from a video store, or a book that I might buy off of a bookstore? So we started investigating that question, and in that process, we basically analyzed about 100+ countries and their relationship with cash, and why they use cash in some countries, and some countries are actually moving away from it. What are the underlying drivers and barriers, and what are the costs of using cash or using digital alternatives? Now, I'll come back to that question as I sort of give you the full arc of the digital plan. Now, from there, we said, okay, it's not just cash that is somewhere in the midpoint between physical and digital. All kinds of activities, products, services, forms of interactions are going from physical to digital in the world. So we started a major research initiative which covered 80 countries, and we wanted to understand how societies overall, business, government, civil society, how they're transitioning from a physical past to a digital future. We created an index of all of those activities called the Digital Evolution Index, which now covers 80 countries. And we can create a map of what the digital planet looks like, and who is more digitally evolved and who is still making their way up the curve, who's moving faster and who's slowing down. Now, from there, we went to try and understand how is our relationship with digital itself evolving. We know that we were all excited when we first got our first smartphone or the computer, or whatever app that we spend a lot of time on. But then in the last few years, we went through a period of reckoning with technology and started asking questions about, do I really trust what these companies are doing with all the data that they're collecting every time I tap my finger on a piece of glass? So we then started calibrating what is the state of trust trust in digital technology around the world, and how that is different and how that is shaping behaviors. Now, all of that is a lead up to where we are today. Where we are today is the entire world in different degrees, has gone away from face-to-face interacting and has gone socially distant, as we are right now. All our classes at Fletcher are currently being done in a socially distant way. So we swiveled and pivoted, took a big part of our research efforts, moved it from whatever we were planning to do before and directed it towards trying to understand how is the digital world working under the COVID situation, and what is likely to be the picture as we continue to go deeper into this tunnel. What are the recommendations that we can make to policymakers right now as they're considering this critical trade-off between flattening the curve, slowing down the spread of the pandemic, and at the same time considering the gigantic economic costs that they have to incur as they put that economy on pause. Now, obviously, flattening the curve has got to be the #1 priority. But if I'm going to slow down the economy, how do I reduce the cost of slowing down the economy? The way I do that is make the economy ready for socially distant work by making the economy capable of using those digital technologies. So we've now created measures of social distance readiness around the world. And I can tell you which countries are doing really well and should be the gold standards, and every other country should start looking at what they're doing and implementing that right now, including the United States, and which countries are in a lot of trouble. The country in a lot of trouble, there are several of you who are right there, India. Operating at a very low level of readiness in terms of socially distant work. And we also know that India, if the public health situation does rise to the level of where it has been in other parts of the world, the public health readiness is also going to be, just as catastrophic. So a big challenge in countries like India, which needs to there need to be some near-term work that needs to be done, and over the longer term, some deeper infrastructural investments need to be made. Countries like Singapore and the Netherlands are gold standards in terms of preparedness for a socially distant economy. And Singapore is also proven to be a gold standard in terms of preparedness for the public health situation. There are some countries that are sort of in the in-between stage, and the United States is an in-between stage. Of course, I can go on for a long time about that. And the other, one more thing that we're doing, actually there's several things we're doing in terms of the digital economy work as it relates to the current environment. I'll just share with you one more project which I am very, very passionate about, is we're trying to understand what is the state of people's lives as they're living through this crisis in real time. And it's very difficult to get that kind of information from the media or from the state channels, because it gets filtered, the media doesn't necessarily have access, and the state quite often is shaping the narrative in many parts of the world. So we go to people where they are on social media. We are scraping their posts on social media. We're running it through a machine learning algorithm and trying to understand what are the sentiments in different parts of the world as they're going through the crisis. We've got a 7-week window that started in the end of January in Wuhan, and we can track how trust in government, trust in science, trust in the public health officials, trust in my neighbors, how that evolved over the 7-week period. We have begun a 7-week window in India and in South Africa to try and do some comparisons and basically develop some policy prescriptions. So I'm going to pause there because there's just much more that we can share across all of us here at Fletcher than we have time for on this very limited call. You can certainly reach me. I can give you my contact information. You can also get it on the website. Feel free to get in touch, and we can give you much more background and context and have a conversation to the extent it's helpful for you in your current situation, but also helpful for you as you consider the next step in your own journey. So let me sort of pause this part of the discussion here. Alnoor, I hope I've given just a little bit of a flavor for what we're doing in Digital Planet. Excellent. Dorothy, Agnes, would you like to add something along on issues relating to the student experience while they're at Fletcher and the student experience as they prepare to leave Fletcher and go out into the professional world? Perhaps I start with Agnes and then to Dorothy.
Actually, sorry, I was reading the questions. I'm ready to give you some questions that the students prepared for us. But Dorothy, maybe you want to answer this one.
quickly, since I know we want to get to your questions, I've worked here at Fletcher for a number of years, and what I have discovered, no matter the conditions out there in the world, and we are in extraordinary conditions, our students are remarkably resilient. You are remarkably resilient, and so I have the pleasure of working with students one-on-one and helping them and partnering with them and helping to place them in different parts of the world and the economy, much like the professors here as well. We take it very very personally, and it's basically work from the heart to help our students fulfill their particular ambitions and goals and life desires. Graduate school is the ultimate growth machine and growth experience. And so what I would like to share with you is that if you decide to join us, and if you're coming to join us, we're going to work with you. I will work with you personally to help to figure out where you want to go and help you understand where the opportunities are, and to shape your narrative and your time at Fletcher so that it is for your maximum experience and growth. So without further ado, I know there are some questions and we're running out of time, so I'll turn it back to Aggie.
Thank you, Dorothy. We indeed received several questions, and if I may just maybe group them in two areas. One area is, wondering about Professor Ebrahim's work, a little bit more on measuring social change. If you could speak a little bit more about that. And the other group of questions have to do with preparation for Fletcher. How do I prepare for getting ready for studying business at Fletcher? And what are some examples of, as I'm leaving, capstone projects and careers that people completed and ended up going into? Thank you.
Alnoor, go ahead.
Okay. Great. So just a little bit about my work. So my latest project is this new book called Measuring Social Change, published with Stanford University Press. This was a multi-year project where I actually spent time with a bunch of organizations executing social change on the ground in India, in the US, globally, and trying to understand, how do they decide what to measure? There's a lot of pressure from the outside world, from funders, from investors, to say, you've got to identify your long-term outcomes and then actually measure that. This turns out to be very difficult for small organizations, even some of the big ones, to do. And I wanted to understand from a manager's perspective, what's holding them back? What are the challenges? And how can they be very strategic in their selection of what they measure and feed it back into their decision-making, right? So it's not sort of the outside world saying, what impact are you having? It's inside, it's the manager and the executive team saying, what data do we need to actually improve our work in order to have sustainable social impact? So it's a managerial lens. So the book is really about measuring, but also managing social impact. And it's written for managers and social change organizations, as well as their investors and funders. And I basically landed on 4 key strategies that any social change organization has to pick from. And depending on the strategy that you pick, the actual measurement system you build has to be different. So let me just give you 2 really quick examples. If you're an ambulance service, so I looked at one of the largest providers of ambulance services in India. It's called Zakitsa Healthcare Limited. It was launched by a group of young people, one of whom was a former student of mine. If you're an ambulance service, what are you measuring? It turns out that their key metric is response time, right? Which is, how much time does it take for an ambulance to respond to the call and administer emergency services on site with the patient? It turns out if you have a cardiac event, chances of patient survival go up if you respond within 9 to 12 minutes. This is kind of the gold standard for that. Now compare this to an organization that's trying to solve the problem of urban homelessness in Washington, DC. And they're working with 100 different organizations, each of whom is working on some aspect of the homelessness problem. What they've got is they've got an ecosystem approach. They're looking at who's working on food provision, who's working on shelter, who's working on job, who's working on mental health services. They need to pull all of this together and orchestrate it. What should they be measuring? And what's the capacity of a manager to do this kind of work? In the original example, I called it a niche strategy. It's highly focused. You can measure some short-term results, which is that response time. And it turns out that the short-term metric is perfectly adequate. And you need a system for actually being able to do this. On the homelessness example, you're looking at long-term results, which is getting people out of homelessness, but no single organization can take credit for it. So they need to build a system of coordination, of orchestration, focused on delivering the long-term results. And so they need to actually be measuring their coordination capacity and the way in which that gets to those long-term results. It requires a completely different measurement system within the organization. And so basically, I've written a book that's actually about strategy that's connected to identifying your strategy and then linking it to your metrics and your measurement system. So that's just a flavor of that kind of work. The next phase of work that I'm launching now is saying, can we look at a whole range of ecosystem level problems? So health pandemics is one, global climate change and local sort of adaptation to climate problems is another. Urban homelessness is a third, and there's a whole range, there's sort of dozens of such problems. And I'm asking the question, what is a good managerial response to ecosystem level problems? How do you organize a system to be able to do this kind of work? And what is the role of business, civil society, and government in terms of doing this? Can we identify models of system orchestration that could actually enable doing this work? So that's the next project that I'll be working on for the next couple of years. And certainly those of you that come to Fletcher, if you're interested in that sort of a problem, reach out to me so that we can find ways of working on that together.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just a couple more examples. There was the question about sort of student projects, and I know we're reaching the end of our time. So let me give you a couple examples of student projects right now. So I've got a student working on developing a human rights benchmark that can actually be measured. What is the corporate work? How do we measure? We take existing human rights benchmarks, and she's looking particularly at people that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And what is the role of business in actually working with these folks and enabling opportunities for them? And she's developing a standard that can actually be measured for the role of business in this. And it's connecting it to existing work that's happening with the World Benchmarking Alliance and other organizations on this. Another student is actually looking at what is the work in impact investing around agriculture? Can you develop a key set of metrics that can help inform agriculture-focused investments and their impact on human health and nutrition? So she's working with a huge database developed by MSCI, one of the big providers and collectors of data in the industry, to say, can we extract from that key metrics related to human health and nutrition that can help investors make decisions around this? So she's developed a whole model around this as part of her capstone.
Great, thank you, Alnoor, for those wonderful, just a tiny window into the very vast body of work that you're doing as part of your own research program and the research collective that you have created around you with all of your students. If I could just close out with two more examples of capstones and where capstones take our students beyond Fletcher, just in the last year itself. Let me just pick two very different stories which help perhaps build out a picture for all of you as you imagine yourself being here. So one is a student who is so phenomenal that she got 3 job offers in the middle, towards the end of her, beginning of her second year. One of the job offers was where she's going to Amazon, and she had 2 other job offers where she's not going, so I will not name those organizations. But one of those organizations kind of said, regardless of whether you come and join us or not, we have a big problem that we'd like you to help us solve, which is how do we organize the social responsibility part of our business Do we keep it as part of a foundation? Do we put it into a business unit? Do we create a separate unit with its own metrics? What is the organizational architecture that supports social responsibility as part of an inclusive growth strategy for our business? So our student, not taking up the job offer, but she took up the offer to write her capstone to answer that question for that company, and essentially presented the idea to the CEO and the senior management team. And the senior management team has taken her advice into consideration, and they are thinking about reorganizing their company and its social responsibility portion of its portfolio along those lines, while our student heads off to Seattle to start her job at Amazon. Second student, the question that he was working on was part of the research that we were doing in the Digital Planet, where we were asking the question, what countries and what governments around the world are the gold standards in terms of using digital technology to provide public services to their citizens? And so we knew that there were 5 countries in the world that had basically self-created a club, and they described themselves as the gold standard. So we wanted to ask the question, what would be the next 5 countries that could be the preeminent candidates to join that club? And our student took that on as a research question, used it to create a capstone, came out with a recommendation for the next 5 countries. 4 out of the 5 countries that he had recommended are now part of this club called the Digital 10. And the student took up a job with the government of New Zealand advising on the digital strategy for the country of New Zealand, which happens to be one of the founding members of the original digitally enabled governments in the world. So it's a wonderful way to kind of come full circle in terms of research, capstone, and professional aspirations. I don't know, I'm sure we have lots of questions, lots of ideas to discuss, but we've also hit the boundary of time. I have a few more minutes here. I don't know if others do as well. We are happy to bring the formal part of this session to a close, but if there are any additional points that people would like to check in on, or other things that my colleagues would like to share, we can take a few more minutes here. Aggie, you're the director of this meeting, so direct us, please.
I think I really like your suggestion, Bhaskar, and thank you for offering that. We do have a few questions here that are a little bit more specific to certain students' backgrounds, as well as certain situations or regions in the world. So for those who would like to stay on and have a discussion, please do so. Okay. And I don't know if you have any closing remarks, Bhaskar, for the main session.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily want to chew up time with closing remarks, other than to say, stay safe, stay healthy, take care of those who you're close to, but don't get too close to them, and keep your chin up and don't touch your chin, all that kind of stuff. And basically, to reiterate the point that, yes, we are going through a tunnel. The tunnel can be longer than we might expect. It might be shorter than we might expect, but there is going to be daylight at the other end. The conversation that we're having here is about what do we do when we are out there blinded by the daylight, and how do we then rebuild the world beyond it? And that, in many ways, is the fundamental question that is going to come back to your generation. And the question for all of you is, where do I want to be in order to be prepared for that? What community do I want to be a part of? Because I'm not going to be able to do this alone. I'm not going to be able to figure this out alone. And I want to be in a community where I am part of that central narrative. I'm not at the periphery. I'm not the only person in the class thinking about these things. I want people who are to the left and to the right of me, and a professor or a mentor who's in front of me, who's helping us sort of think about the frameworks, the concepts, the ideas, the insights, and for me to develop my own theory of change and my own pathway to making change in the world. So other than that, no other closing thoughts. Do reach out to us for all the specifics and tactical issues, which are, I'm sure, lots of. Regardless of how this tunnel unfolds, I can assure you that our doors are going to open in the fall the doors are going to be either digital or real. We are prepared for either. We have long before this pandemic, we had created an entire digital version of the Fletcher School. So we've been ready even before this was thrust upon us. So we are ready to go if you are. Aggie, back to you.
With that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today, and thank you so much, Dean Chakravorti and Professor Ebrahim and Dorothy and DP and others who spoke today. This video was recorded, as you know, and will be available online on our admitted student website. So thank you again, everyone. And for those who would like to ask a direct question, please feel free to stay on. Thank you.
Are there any questions, Aggie, that you want to relay based on?
So I would like, I actually went ahead and unmuted our participants. So feel free to also raise your hand and speak up if you would like to ask a question. There's a question from Sally. She says where she works, she says, we're seeing that this pandemic is already having huge impacts on inequality and injustice. How can we focus efforts in terms of inequality, and especially in regions that are offline?
Very good question, Sally. I certainly have some perspectives on it, but let me ask Alnoor if you would care to share some insights.
Yeah, I think if we think of a timeline, right, there's sort of the short term, immediate term, what is it that one can do, both individually as well as part of some organized unit. What's medium term, sort of within the next year, and then what's long term. And I think, as Bhaskar was saying, so I think we're ideally positioned at Fletcher to be thinking about the medium and the long term. And then as individuals to sort of take action at a local level. And so to give you an example, I've been in touch with some of my students here. The US has sort of just launched this pretty large economic aid package. And we're currently trying to figure out what is the application process by which civil society groups and small businesses can apply for that. And then we're sending that out in our networks so that people don't have to look for how to find that relief. We're kind of trying to send that information to them. And we're trying to figure out whether they need support in terms of filling out some of these applications. And I haven't quite figured that out yet. But this is sort of the part of the short-term response that I'm involved in this. Medium and long-term, for my own work, this is really sort of exactly in this domain of what is the kind of cross-sector ecosystem level infrastructure that we need to be building over time. And what are examples of whether, examples of both at a local, regional, and national level where this has actually worked. So I'm in the process of gathering data, news clippings, and so on, of what is actually happening and how are different societies organizing around this. I don't know exactly what the research project will be around this that I'll sort of build up over the next year or two, but it will have to do with how do we organize for cross-sector work so that it can happen efficiently in a way that's suited to the context of those societies. So that's the bigger picture research-based work that ultimately has to happen if we're going to be able to deal with this kind of a crisis again.
Yeah, thank you, Alnoor. If I could just add just a couple of points first on the very near term, the stimulus package issue, and there are different versions of that are being rolled out in other countries. Of course, other countries don't necessarily have the resource. Many countries don't have the resources to even populate a stimulus package. And the United States didn't have the political will, but now finally it does. Now, one big challenge that we're seeing, and we're trying to nudge policymakers on this by writing about it, is that the stimulus package is meant for most critically for those who are losing their jobs, and they cannot replicate it in a socially distant way. They cannot do what we're basically doing on Zoom and continuing to do their work. So how do we reach those people who are inherently digitally disadvantaged because they're not information economy workers? These are the people who might be the cooks, the dishwashers in restaurants that have closed down. These are the people who run dry cleaning shops. These are the people who might be the farmhands in agricultural areas that basically are not being allowed to kind of come into the farms or operate equipment. And how do we get their checks to them? Now, what we have been studying is the disparity in terms of the digital connectivity across the United States itself. And so the people who need the stimulus money right now are also the ones that are going to be at the back of the queue in terms of them being able to transmit their banking information and then being able to provide proof that they have actually earned the paycheck, because that's how you get the unemployment money. So it gets very nitty-gritty, very, very tactical, but that's where the devil is in the details. And that's what we are trying to uncover and actually provide shed some light on, so that policymakers can hopefully, come out with alternatives, a way to bypass these obvious bureaucratic hurdles. So that's kind of one perspective to add to Alnoor's in terms of how we are collectively and individually thinking about just some of the near-term challenges. Another near-term challenge in the digital area is people are the same people who are waiting for this check to come. They also live in neighborhoods where the school system is weak, and the school systems, the weakness of the school systems also translates into weakness in terms of digital connectivity and the capabilities of the teachers and the students to be able to study at home. So the parents are being hit by multiple waves of disadvantages because they have children at home who are not getting educated. And so how do we nudge the internet service providers to actually provide hotspots, to provide free access, to raise the caps on data in these poorer neighborhoods across the country? And this is true not just for the United States, it's true for Colombia, it's true for wherever you're situated right now. In terms of some of the longer term issues, I just had an absolutely phenomenal, inspirational CEO in my class earlier this week, Paul Polman, who used to be the CEO of Unilever for 10 years. There's so many things that Paul shared with our class in that period, but there's one thing that I really took away, which I have to try to figure out how we implement that into some form of policy. He said one of the areas that he and Unilever focused on was trying to get sustainability as a strategy, not just for Unilever, but across the entire value chain. So he basically used the leverage and the might of a gigantic company like Unilever to force all the suppliers up the chain to implement sustainability objectives as part of their operating principles. Now, how do I do that? Obviously, I use the power of Unilever, but also I narrow the number of suppliers I'm working with. If I've got thousands of suppliers, and of course, Unilever has hundreds and hundreds of products. So we've got thousands of suppliers. So basically he narrowed it down, or they narrowed it down to about 100 suppliers that contribute to 60% of all their suppliers. So now when I have a narrower set of partners to work with, I can potentially get into a partnership conversation with them rather than trying to strong arm them into doing something that they don't want to do. And the ones who don't want to do it, they leave that club. So it was a very important lesson in strategy, which is know where to play. And how do you then get to your objectives? It was phenomenal. So it brought in the smallholder farmers and the tea pickers from around the world who are at the other end. They are not the big 100 suppliers, they are the little people, and essentially brought them into the payroll in order to get them to become aligned with Unilever and give them a safety net and a sense of support. So a lot of what we are going to be doing going ahead, whether it's the stimulus package or other forms of help, is to create these relevant networks. And we can learn from some organizations that have done this better than others. So, of course, much longer conversation, but great question. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Bhaskar. And I realized that
I think Matthew has a
coming to the end. Yes, we had one blue hand, Matthew.
Okay. Matthew, go ahead. Matthew, you need to unmute.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's afternoon in Madrid. Personally, I have been deep mode. I have never been so positive about business, and I'm trying to find a way to desensitize about that as I am growing up gradually, trying to understand how business is run in the world. So profit and social impact, are the two not contradictory objectives? Do the two not work against each other? How can we promote social impact at the same time promote the profit motive of businesses? That has been my confusion.
Great question. Alnoor, DP, love your thoughts.
Sure. I think it's a really important question, Matthew. And I think we need to understand, is there a trade-off? And if it is, what does it look like? Now, there may be certain conditions where there isn't a trade-off. And so, you know, a company that's building cell phone connectivity, you know, enabling people to connect with each other, there may actually be an alignment between the profit motive and scaling the business so that more people have connectivity. Right now, so we need to ask the question, when are those motives actually aligned and can actually work for scaling? Right? So markets are really good at sort of distributing and scaling certain things. And then there may be other instances where actually, you know, if you price pharmaceuticals beyond the reach of people, where the profit motive really is in conflict with the social objectives, right? And so we're seeing it right now here in the US. You know, different states are competing for ventilators on eBay. So New York is competing with California, with Massachusetts, and the federal government is not stepping in, right? This is where there's a role for government. If the government were to, federal government were to step in and say, we're going to buy all the ventilators and then we're going to distribute them on an equitable basis across the states, then you've got sort of a regulatory role for actually putting the profit motive in its place. And so we need to be clear about what are the conditions under which it's aligned and where is it actually in conflict, and what is the role then for public policy and regulation to step in. So it's exactly the right question, and it's in fact a question that we discussed in class just last week in our conversation around where does acumen invest and when does it come into conflict with this issue. So you're right on the mark.
Thank you, Alnoor. DP, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I think
Or disagree?
Very articulate on this. It is indeed the challenge, and indeed the challenge that Fletcher in particular is the right place to ask and work on these questions. Bhaskar, you talked about Paul Pullman and his talk earlier. I think he'd be an excellent guy to answer this question. I can't think of a better person. So maybe forward the recording of that session to Matthew. But it is, I think that the issue of is primarily about the role that policy plays in mediating the conflict between the two motives, and the two motives are important, and they often align in any, you know, in the natural course of events, but where conflicts need to be resolved is where policy needs to step in, and Alnoor I think gave an excellent illustration of that.
So thank you, DP, and in the spirit of Fletcher, we will leave you with more discomfort than comfort at the end of any session. So let me leave you with an uncomfortable thought. The uncomfortable thought is I actually disagree with Alnoor and to some extent with DP in the following sense. Both Alnoor and DP are very measured and polite and thoughtful. I'm not so. Let me just put out a radical perspective here. Social impact is not possible without profit. Let me put it out there. Simply because the problems that we are talking about are enormous. There are a number of incredibly powerful creative solutions that can be done at localized levels. To be able to get to solutions that respect the size of the problems, to be able to scale, we absolutely need to bring profit organizations to the table. Otherwise, we do not have the ability to scale those solutions. So Alnoor mentioned the importance of scale. I would simply kind of submit to you that without the help of the private sector, it's going to be very difficult, because the governments have historically not kept their part of the commitments. You just think about the Sustainable Development Goals, and if you look at how much governments had committed and how far behind they've been in terms of commitments, there's no way that we could put up the kinds of money that were needed even before the pandemic. $3 to $5 trillion a year were needed to get to the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. There is no way that that could have been accomplished by the Gates Foundation, all the governments in the world, and all the social sector organizations of the world. The only way to get to those is if the private sector were to step in. Now, the problem, of course, is that profit motives take the private sector in a different direction. So there is a role for policy, for governments, for the social sector to bring those actors to the table and be able to play that coordinating role and potentially mitigate some of the conflictual aspects of profit. An example of which is the market essentially not working, the market failing, and how does government then correct for market failure? So let me leave you on that controversial thought. I absolutely believe that the problems that we have to solve for, whether it's climate change or a post-pandemic world, will not be done without business as part of it.
Thank you, Bhaskar, and thank you all of you again for joining today.
Great. Well,
hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we're gonna close this off with these uncomfortable facts.
Absolutely. And hopefully we get you here to help us, come up with solutions and resolve, some of these very, very difficult and complex issues. So stay well, and we hope to see you very soon.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.